It's time to accelerate. Hi, I'm your host, Andy Paul. Join me as I host conversations with the leading experts in sales, marketing, sales automation, sales process, leadership, management, training, coaching, any resource that I believe to help you accelerate the growth of your sales, your business, and most importantly, you. Hello, and welcome to Accelerate. I'm excited to talk with my guest today. Joining me is Michael Nick. Michael's a principal at Technology Finance Partners, founder of ROI for Sales, and a best-selling author, including his newest book, Adapt or Fail, Process with Power. You know, we all know the way sales is changing. It's not only the way you sell, it's also the way customers buy. And it's not just about the fact that your prospects can learn so much more about you from your website and social profiles. No, it's more about that. I mean, that's more than that. The process of gathering and evaluating information and making decisions about products and services is evolving. And sales reps need to change with it. And my guest today, Michael Nick, has written a new book about these changes, and he's going to help you understand what it takes to adapt to these new changes in real time to succeed in sales. So, Michael, welcome to the show.
Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
So, take a minute, fill in my introduction. Tell us about yourself. How'd you get your start in sales?
Oh, boy. Let's see. I'm really old, so you're giving away my age.
Well, we could have a contest about that.
I started by selling newspapers. Yeah, really. That's going a little bit too far.
Hey, I started with women's shoes at JCPenney's.
Yeah. Out of college, I was going to be a lawyer, and I had studied my undergrad, my master's, with the intent of becoming a lawyer. And on my way to law school, I stopped in Arizona and started working the summer for a company doing demos. I was a demo jock for a company selling construction accounting software. So I got to know that field pretty well. And I couldn't understand why I was doing all the work and the salesmen were making all the money.
Isn't it always the case?
Compute.
Right.
So I made the big switch, went into sales, made a lot of money, did very well. I think my first year or two, I did like any young 23-year-old would do, is I went out and bought a Rolex and a cool car and beautiful Italian shoes and did stupid things with my money, and worked my way up to one of the top sales guys in the organization. I worked for Timberline at the time.
Oh, I sold a bunch of Timberline stuff when I worked for Burroughs.
Yeah, and then Burroughs bought them.
Yeah.
And when that happened, I got recruited by a company out of Wisconsin, and I moved to Wisconsin, and eventually, I worked my way up to the VP of Worldwide Sales and Marketing, and I took that company from when I started, they were about $1.5 million, and when I left, they were about $30 million. And when I left the company, I started ROI for Sales, and it was really by accident. I was working with Great Plains, and I was hired to do a interesting project for them. They were trying to qualify service calls so that they had the best service in the world. And they did this so that they were able to kind of triage it before it got to the actual person at Great Plains. And I was in Atlanta working with their biggest distributor, and we came across this idea of using math to validate. And it was a simple calculation. It was something simple like, let's see, if a serviceman calls in and wants to send out one part, how much does that cost? If the service guy calls 3 times a day and each time he orders a part, every time we order the part, they've been packaging it and sending it one at a time, it'd be cheaper to do it together. And all of a sudden, we looked at each other like an epiphany and said, well, why don't we put this stuff together? I mean, why doesn't software figure this out? And so we figured out a whole bunch of things in the service area that would work for. And I went back to Great Plains and said, tell you what, I'll build you this. At the time, I didn't know what it was, but an ROI model for free if I can keep the intellectual property, because working for them, they technically would have owned it.
Sure.
So I went out, I copywrote it, sent it to the Library of Congress, started writing ROI selling, and then I sold the concept to HP, and that was the beginning of ROI for Sales about 20 years ago. And since then, we've done about 180 models and grew the company, and then about a year and a half ago, I sold it to a company called Technology Finance Partners. And their business is rooted in vendor finance programs, but they have a consulting and services group that 3 or 4 of us work together, and we do training, and we do ROI models, we do field support, we do all sorts of cool stuff for the sales world. And at the same time, they allow me to continue to write and speak and things like that.
All right. Well, very interesting. We'll have to talk offline about our shared background. Maybe we crossed paths at some time back in the day.
Sure.
So I'm sure we know people in common. So let's talk about your latest book, Adapt or Fail. What very interesting premise here. What was the impetus to write this book?
Good question, and I find this interesting that, well, first of all, I have two millennial children, and one of them is big in business. She spent some time in Europe. She's working at Northern Trust. Really smart kid, but still, she's a millennial. Mm-hmm. And so we get into these discussions about millennials, and it dawned on me that, as millennials begin to move into positions of power, I mean, by the year 2020, they'll be 70% plus of the workforce. And by 2022, they will have more buying power than baby boomers. So think about that. So in the next 5 to 6 years, as a sales professional, you need to figure out how to deal with millennials. And they just, again, I'll show my age. They're just not normal. I mean, they're the only generation that has grown up with technology, which is interesting in itself. I mean, you see 2, 3, 4-year-olds playing with an iPhone, and they do it better than we do, you and I. And so I was intrigued with the concept of, as these millennials move into these power positions, how do you deal with them? You can't deal with them in traditional ways. And so I overlaid that on my idea that the future of sales is going to change, as it does about every decade and a half, about every 15 years. And so I overlaid the concept with what I call the past, the present, and the problem. And the problem is there are several issues that you're going to have to deal with as a sales professional in the future. You have to deal with the C-suite, which we do now, but it's going to get more intense. You have to provide financial validation and justification. That's a fact. It's just a fact that it's going to happen, and it's going to happen more and more in the future. They want this. Statistics prove that out. You have to be able to articulate your value. This I find very interesting because, again, millennials think differently. They are, by definition, the most collaborative of all generations because they can be in the back seat, 3 millennials, and they're texting each other rather than talking. I mean, that's just strange. And again, not normal.
Well,
and then you also have to produce.
For those millennials listening, you are normal. Just you have a different way of doing things.
It's true. It's kind of like the 50s thought of the 60s and the 60s thought of the 70s, and it's every generation thinks their generation is the generation. So
right. And but a question for you that sprung to mind as I was listening to you talk and also reviewing your materials is that. Okay, so 70% of the workforce is going to be millennials. Is by the time this really takes hold, it's really millennials selling to millennials at that point. So even though I know that the book somewhat is a cautionary tale for those of us who aren't millennials, but by and large, at that point, isn't it going to be millennials selling to millennials? And do they not understand how to sell to themselves, or? It's just interesting question for you.
It's really not. Think of the generation that ran between baby boomers and millennials. We're forgetting about the Gen Xers.
And they never let you forget it.
Exactly. And so this book is really targeted for Gen Xers selling to millennials and millennials selling to millennials. And what it is it's a foundation for things you need to do today to be prepared to be selling in the short term and the long term as well. But there are techniques. There are dozens and dozens of techniques that you can start right now to make yourself a better salesperson, more informed, better at what you do. It's kind of like the next step to the Sales Bible.
So next gen Sales Bible. What's the first commandment?
Well, the first thing you need to do is do your research. And I know people say, oh, well, we've been told this for years and years and years. But there are techniques to do that research. So, for example, if you sell something that reduces inventory carrying costs, for example, maybe your software sells an inventory management module or something, where to go and where to look for on a financial statement to see what a company is doing with their inventory, whether it's growing or not growing, whether they're paying too much in carrying cost, whether they're not. How to read and interpret a financial statement, for example. There's 20 pages or more on just understanding financial statements and how to dig information out of those financial statements.
Yeah, it's a great example because I think that right now, if you tell a salesperson, look, you need to go research the company and the prospect, what they'll do is they're going to go on their LinkedIn profile and look at the person they're talking to. It's very superficial. So
exactly.
So definitely one of the things that research is showing into buyers is that buyers expect more business acumen from sellers. And there's a huge gap now between that expectation and the reality, right? I mean, you've seen the studies, I'm sure, as you research your book, is that 80% plus of C-suite executives think that there's no value. They get no value from their meetings with salespeople.
Yeah, I saw that statistic. I think that was a Forrester research stat.
Right.
It was 80 plus per. Yeah, I saw that. And which really, you just make my point of what the baseline of the book is that the absolute first thing you need to do is to define and understand your value proposition. And we give you an exercise in there called a value inventory. It's a workshop that we offer, but it's something you can do on your own as well as a sales
personal value inventory, personal value proposition. Right. Okay.
Yes,
just to be clear for the listeners.
Yeah, and it's really important that you understand why people buy from you from their eyes. So you have to look at the buyer from the buyer's eyes into, why do I need this? Why do I want this? What's the value in what you deliver? And there are a series of questions that walk you through coming up with 8 or 10 really key reasons people buy from you, what your competitive advantage is, how that person, that buyer would rank them, who the stakeholder is. And then there's another section completely on buyer personas. It's understanding your buyer and what motivates them to buy, how they're compensated. And so I really dig deep into the foundation as well as the techniques to help you, like, for example, reading a financial statement or creating a value hypothesis or building a business case. So it's a really end-to-end book that should help you sell today, tomorrow, and deep into the future with millennials.
Yeah, and I mean, it's a great point about the value inventory because, as you know, I mean, in today's world, the first line of differentiation is the salesperson, not the company or the product.
That's true.
I mean, if you want to be able to get your foot in the door, start building rapport and trust, it's on you. And yeah, if they sense from the beginning that you are too superficial in your understanding of their needs, if you come in and talk about yourself versus them, asking good questions, then yeah, that first impression really sets you back. You're at a competitive disadvantage from the get-go.
Right. You make a really good point when you quoted the Forrester statistic. I took it one step further and said, look, it's one thing to understand your value proposition, and it's another thing to understand the issues, pains, and goals that your customers are having. But the key is to link them. The key is to say, if this problem exists, here's what my value proposition is. Here's how I can fix your problem. And then I take it another step and say, here's what the impact's going to be on your financial health. So we link it almost 3 steps. What's your problem? What's the solution? And then how I can impact your financial health and where to find that impact as well.
Right. So, and it really speaks to the hiring of the salespeople. So this is an area where there's always a lot of contention, especially when I write about it, because I'm fairly strong in my opinions, is, I believe you hire specialists, not generalists. Mm-hmm. That increasingly, in the world that you're describing, which is the world I believe is already here, but is going to evolve even further, is if you want to be successful in sales, you have to be able to deliver this value to the prospect. And to be able to do that, you need this business acumen. To develop this business acumen, it's not just general business acumen. You need to have those people have more well-developed expertise in their specific customer's field of endeavor have an advantage.
Exactly. And
so why is there such pushback about that? Why do people say, oh, no, I want to hire the best available athlete? And I'm like, seriously? I mean, the pushback, because I talk about this and end up writing a blog post in response to somebody that really pushed back strong on about it. As I said, I've never had a customer, when I was managing sales, I never had a customer pick up the phone and call me and say, hey, Andy, we really like you. We like your company or product. But, John, who's here selling to me, he's just not salesy enough. Right? Never had that happen.
No.
Right?
Nor I.
And it's never, I called it the question your customer is never going to ask you. Please send over somebody more. But I've had the opposite happen. We're saying, look, your guy just doesn't know what the heck he's talking about. He's not helping me at all. So why is that? Why should that be still so contentious? It seems like specialist is where you want to go. And this idea about, innate sales skills that generalists have and building relationships is just, that's crap as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. One of the things that I think is really difficult for both baby boomers and Gen Xers to understand about millennials is their view of the world. They certainly as a sales professional, sales manager, president, buyer, purchasing agent, whatever they might be in this world, they have a view of the world that says, I want to make a difference. I want a salesman to come to me, or a sales professional to come to me with a proposal for how they're going to impact my company, but how they're going to impact my entire company and the world around my company. So they're looking at things like environmental impact. They're looking at things like, I can't call it crazy. I have to call it that they have this different view of the world than we do. We grew up polluting. We grew up doing all these crazy things. Well, the millennials are not doing that. They're looking at this saying, if I buy you, this is the impact on this department, but it's also the impact on this organization. And when you sell to a millennial, now and in the future, you need to have a bigger view of what they think is important to them. So when you do buyer personas, it's important to understand what's important to that organization beyond that department that you're selling to. It just goes deeper. And you have to be like an onion. You have to be multi-layered and have that ability to communicate at that level. And I think, again, this kind of goes back to where you're talking about how you hire a specialist versus a generalist. And if you read the book end to end, and I couldn't tell you where it's at, but I make the same point you do, that the world is turning to specialists because of that reason. So we are completely on the same page in that topic.
Violent agreement. Good. All right. We're going to take a short break. We'll be right back with my guest, Michael Nick. We're going to talk more about changes that are happening in the workforce that impact how you sell to decision makers. And based on his new book, Adapt or Fail. We'll be right back. Hi, this is Andy. Connect and Sell is used by sales reps at nearly 1,000 companies, including hundreds of technology startups and several Fortune 500 companies, to overcome the challenges of getting prospects on the phone. Companies using Connect and Sell grow their revenues faster by enabling their sales reps to have more sales conversations in 90 minutes than they could otherwise achieve in an entire week. Connect and Sell can be deployed directly to your sales reps, or you can take advantage of their outbound on-demand service, which delivers qualified prospect meetings scheduled directly on your sales reps' calendars. Visit connectandsell.com to learn more about how Connect and Sell can start filling your pipeline today. All right, welcome back with my guest today, Michael Nick. And an interesting point you brought up that, we were talking about sort of the economic validation of the purchase becomes more important, but hasn't it always been important?
Well, I think it has from a superficial view. I think that millennials believe it and that they are committed to it much more so than any other generation that I can ever remember.
But you don't think the people you were selling to, because it's interesting, you brought that up and I had seen it as I was preparing for this interview. It's like, interesting. I remember days I was selling to construction companies with Timberline software.
Yeah.
Yeah. They weren't buying on faith. They were making a pretty detailed economic assessment of the investment and what the payback was going to be.
Yes.
So, but you think that's changed? It's become even, that they didn't go far enough and now people are going further in this assessment?
I do. I think, and you gave a great example as a construction company or heavy highway guys or something like that. They want to control costs and they want to have better reporting and they want one view of the world. And there are many, many reasons technically why they want to buy from you. The millennial will look at not only that, but they will look beyond that and say, what will the impact be not only on project management, but what is the impact going to be on accounting? What's the impact going to be on the guy in the street, the project managers, the secretaries, they are more collaborative. They are more holistic than any other generation has ever been in their buying patterns. And construction is one of the better examples of that because it's so broad and so deep. You don't just put in a project management system without affecting, it depends on the size of the organization, but dozens and dozens, if not hundreds and thousands of people. If you're econ, you're talking about 1,000 plus project managers they have that it would have an impact on.
Okay.
I just think they do it deeper. And I think that as a sales professional, your research needs to go deeper. You need to look at organizations and say, what are they supporting? What are their charitable contributions? Go deeper than the financials. Go deeper than a LinkedIn search, an advanced LinkedIn search, which we teach you how to do as well. And get into understanding the persona. Get into understanding the organization's goals. Go listen to the MD&A. Go when they do their quarterly call. Listen in. I mean, there's so much knowledge that you can gain from that exercise.
All right.
And salespeople just don't do that today.
Yeah. So I mean, all right. So here's
Some do, but
some
not
do. Right. So here's a question: is certainly one that's people that regular listeners of the show will know that's sort of soapbox I get up onto is sort of this lack of curiosity among sales to continue to develop their own skill set, their own knowledge. A tendency just sort of to wait for the company to train them as opposed to being out aggressively reading books like yours on their own or so on. So does that change with millennials in your mind? Are they more curious? Are they more likely to continue to invest in their own development?
Oh, I believe so. I absolutely believe so. I think that the training industry is a $30 billion industry that's going to grow dramatically over the next 10 years. And I think that the training that's going to be offered is more specialized training like we do. I mean, we do training on financial acumen. We do training on specific negotiation that's to your, how your organization responds. Everything's custom. I think that the SPIs and the Miller Hymans of the world, they're going to have great years going forward. But if they don't change the way they teach and to modernize their material, they will fail. And I can already see it happening. Sandler has done giant steps in their changes. SPI with their 3-year, you can have every access to our entire material. Great stuff. A lot of these organizations you see changing dramatically to accommodate that. But I mean, it's an industry that's going to grow rapidly. I truly, truly think so.
All right. So one of the things you talk about is millennials making decisions differently. And so I was sort of curious about that because, our brains are wired all the same.
Yeah.
I mean, since World War II, there's been incredible research into how people make decisions and multiple Nobel Prizes handed out to people, Herbert Simon and others about how people make decisions.
Yeah. I'll pick mine up in a few weeks.
Okay. But I'll nominate you. So how could it really be different?
Well, oh gosh.
I mean, are the brains wired differently? That's why I'm really curious about that whole comment because I said this, people are people.
Yeah, they are. Let me ask you something, and it might be rhetorical, it might not be, but when we were younger in our 20s and 30s selling Timberline software, we could identify the decision maker, couldn't we?
Sure. Yes.
We could identify the process, couldn't we?
Yeah, most times.
Pretty much, Marge is going to look at it, Frank's going to approve it, and John's going to sign the check. I mean, it was that simple. I mean, life was simple. And I give you charts and graphs and cool little diagrams to show you how simple life used to be. And then I show you the more complex model as things became more important to people like mitigation of risk and budgeting and so forth. So millennials in general and by design, I guess, are the most collaborative generation ever. No one decision maker will ever make a decision in a millennial company. It will come from groups. It will come from a collaborative effort. Everyone has an opinion. Every opinion is valued, and it's difficult as a sales professional because you can't challenge a single opinion. You have to deal with a group on a group basis, and it takes a lot of skill and a lot of tons of knowledge to deal with that. And so, yes, the way people make decisions is changing, and it's going to change dramatically going forward because of that generation's collaborative genesis. I mean, they really are. Like I said, 3 teenagers in the back of a car texting each other. It doesn't even make sense to me.
Well, and so I just wonder, though, how different, let's say you're selling a large, complex solution to an enterprise.
Sure.
I mean, I sold large multi-million-dollar complex communication systems to the biggest companies in the world for a number of years. Yeah, that environment's pretty much the same as I was dealing with. There's no one person making the decision. They were collaborative across the enterprise. It didn't.
Yeah, but ultimately one person was, and the collaboration didn't extend as far as it will today. Just take something simple like, as I said, 3 teenagers in the back seat. Ask them where they want to have lunch. I mean, it's a 5-10 minute discussion. It's not, let's go to Arby's, let's go to Subway or whatever it might be. It's a different kind of a discussion than we would have had when we were teenagers or the Gen Xers were teenagers. And in their case, in the case that you brought up with selling multinationals and so forth, yeah, you had to have some other departments involved in it, but not as a holistic organization. I mean, if you sell to AT&T, look at how diverse they are now. Knowing AT&T's future plans, knowing AT&T's charitable efforts, knowing AT&T's structure, it's a lot different. And again, as millennials move into these positions where they have to make where they're going to be the decision makers ultimately, or they're going to hold the budgets, it's going to change. They're going to run differently than people do today.
So one last area to delve into before we go to the last segment of the show is,
sure,
you talk about focusing your sales effort on the deals you can win,
yes.
Which, there's a certain logic to that that's irrefutable. Why is that different? Again, there's another, for people hearing this, listening to that, okay, it seems like, gosh, that's always been our mandate.
Yeah.
But it's never really been the case, though, right? Because we all see pipelines that are full of junk.
Sure.
So what are you talking about there?
What I'm specifically talking about is if you follow a pattern that I lay out, if you follow and use the techniques that I've designed and I'm talking about in the book, then what'll happen is that you will get out of bad deals sooner. Because here's the problem. You're right. You see pipelines filled with all kinds of junk, and we're all investing money in that junk, and we're losing money because we come in second, third, or we're not even considered. We may be column fodder or something.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So what I'm saying is that if you do if you do your research and you have good discovery skills, then if your questions come from your value inventory, if your questions are specific and they give you the ability to monetize value and calculate status quo for an organization, you'll have that tipping point conversation early, and you'll know whether a prospect is real or not. And I not only teach the salesman how to do it, I teach managers how to manage it. And that's what's important, is that your sales force can't run awry. You have to have the ability to look at a forecast in this case and say, that's crap. That's not going to fly. There's no way on earth you're going to get this. And if you do, it's luck. I mean, and everybody has luck every once in a while.
Sure.
Blind squirrel finds a nut, as they'd say. But I think that the techniques will help you get out sooner, and so that you'll understand what's good and what's bad business.
I think it is. I think disqualifying is a key skill.
Yeah,
and
I agree.
And it's one that's really hard, especially in certain sales environments where they're so focused on quantity of activities that it's a real conundrum sometimes for managers that have incentives built on quantities as opposed to quality of their pipeline.
Right. Very few sales books look at it from a manager's view also. I mean, they teach salespeople how to sell better, how to do better discovery, how to create better questions, how to negotiate better, how to do all these things. But rarely do you see a book that says, salesman, here's what you should be thinking about. Manager, here's what you should be thinking about. And there are places in the book where I call that out.
Excellent. Well, good. Well, that book is Adapt or Fail, and we're going to give you a chance in a few minutes to tell people where to find out more about it. But in the meantime, now we're going to the last segment of the show. Got some standard questions to ask all my guests, and the first one is a hypothetical scenario that you're the star of. You've just been hired as a new sales leader at a company whose sales have stalled out, and they want to get unstuck, and the CEO is really anxious for this to happen. So what 2 things would you do your first week on the job that could have the biggest impact?
Fire the sales force. No, I'm kidding. The first thing I would do is, of course, interview the salespeople to find out what's going on, if they understand their value. I've got a series of things I would ask, a series of questions I would ask from a manager's viewpoint as to what's the current state, what's going on, what's happening. That's the first thing I would do. Mm-hmm. And then in my case, the second thing I would do is I would go back to the product marketing or product management, and I would ask the state of the product. And I want to know that the product is solid, that it's quality, that it has opportunity, that there's happy customers. And I would be contacting customers as well. I mean, that giving me a third option in there.
Right.
I would contact customers as well, saying, I'm new. I want to understand what's going on. I want to understand what you're happy about, what you're not happy about, and let you know that things are changing.
Okay, good. So now some So rapid fire questions. You can give me one word answers if you want, or you can elaborate. So the first one is when you, Michael Nick, are out selling, what's your most powerful sales attribute?
Well, in my case, I'm probably more unique because I have three best-selling books. So that's probably my greatest asset is that I have it, I've done it. And I've done it from a guy that works every day selling. I mean, a principal at Technology Finance Partners is not somebody that sits around and does paperwork. It's somebody that does business development every day. I make cold calls. I make warm calls. I call partners. I mean, I'm in the trenches doing.
So when you talk to somebody, what's that first thing they're aware of?
A lot of it's name recognition in my case because people know me from my books, and we work out of a pretty large database that we mine a lot. So most people want to talk about books and things like that. So I mean, it just happens. It's
all right. The celebrity
factor. But in my
factor.
case, it's probably the fact that I have books and have had the experience of doing all the things that I talk about.
All right. Who's your sales role model?
Oh, I love David Sandler. I think he was absolute genius.
Okay.
And I love the Sandler methodology as well. I think it's genius.
All right.
Yeah.
So besides your own, one book every salesperson should read.
You Can't Teach a Kid to Ride a Bike in a Seminar by David Sandler. I think everybody on earth ought to read it. It covers so much. It's such a great book.
Okay. Perfect.
And mine.
But I said, besides your own, yours we'll take for a given. Tough question here is what music's on your playlist right now?
Oh, funny. Actually, it's a local artist here in Wisconsin. His name is Chuck Lang. He's a Latin guitarist, and he plays everything from the Eagles to the Beatles to you name it. He's just amazing. He's phenomenal. He has 4 records out or 4 CDs out, and
all right, we'll check it out. We'll check it out.
Yeah, most of the time.
All right, last question for you. The one question you get asked most frequently by salespeople is?
That's a good question. What is it? Let me just think to the last few conversations I've had with people. Probably the biggest challenge I see and I get asked about a lot is how do I open doors when people don't answer? I get a gatekeeper, I get voicemail, I get spammed, I get whatever it is. And I find that it's ironic that VPs of sales want their salespeople to crack into VP of sales and they don't take calls themselves.
So what's your answer to people?
Well, the answer is that you have to use some of the techniques that I talk about in there. For example, you mentioned it, a LinkedIn advanced search. Go to the advanced search and see who you know that knows someone and ask for an introduction. That's always a good one. Another is using, 2-day air and sending materials that people open those packages. They may not open a letter, but they'll open something that looks like a FedEx package or whatever. So, if you have an interesting enough message and interesting enough materials. I mean, I managed a sales force for the better part of 15 years, and I had gatekeepers, but people could get to me if they had the right message. I mean, you just have to look at inside and say, what would make me want to answer the phone? What would make me want to respond to a sales professional?
Okay, great answer.
I mean, sales makes the world go round. If everybody stopped selling,
nothing would happen.
Yeah. The economy would fall apart. So,
all right, I agree. So, thank you for being on the show today. My guest has been Michael Nick. Michael, tell people how they can find out more about you, your book, and your company.
Well, the publisher set up a website at michaeljnick.com, and there you can read excerpts, read my history. You can see all my different books. If you're in China or Russia, I have books in China and Russia. And you can order the books from Amazon or from me direct or from Nook, anywhere you want it. It's in every format possible. But michaeljnick.com or ROI4sales.com will tell you more about what we do.
Yeah, and that ROI4, the number 4.
Oh, yes, the number
sales.
4. Sadly, yes, yeah.
Excellent. Okay, well, good. Well, thanks for joining me.
Thanks.
And remember, friends, make it a part of your day every day to deliberately learn something new to help you accelerate your success. And one easy way to do that is to make this podcast a part of your daily routine, whether it's on your commute, in the gym, or at your morning sales huddle, because then you'll make sure you don't miss any of my conversations with top business experts like my guest today, Michael Nick, who shared his expertise about how to accelerate the growth of your business. So thanks for joining us, and until next time, this is Andy Paul. Good selling, everyone. Thanks for listening to the show. If you like what you heard and want to make sure you don't miss any upcoming episodes, please subscribe to this podcast on iTunes or Stitcher.com. For more information about today's guest, visit my website at andypaul.com.